Hi, this is Gotti Elcon with Selig Film News here with the man behind Fresh Dressed, Sacha Jenkins. Before we jump into this fun look at culture and dress and just the way people showcase themselves, do you mind if I ask a bit about the Boondocks?
Okay, sure.
What was, because you've been a part of that, you've kind of helped usher that in. I know I'm a big fan. I'm curious. What's it like working with those guys on that? And it hits on such interesting topics. It's not afraid, I guess. What was your experiences like on that and the voice of that show?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't say I ushered in much with the Boondocks. I worked a bit on the first season, right when Aaron Magruder was transitioning from his strip. You know, the Boondocks came out of a strip that was syndicated nationally, and, you know, working and developing the show. So he was doing the strip and simultaneously doing the show, and it was overwhelming. It was a lot of work for him, and his focus was becoming more so on the show. So, interestingly enough, I had the opportunity to work a bit on some of the strip. And then I had the opportunity to work on, you know, some of the scripts for the show. So, what Aaron Magruder has done, I mean, he always has like a really strong voice, and he's not afraid to push buttons, and he uses popular culture, hip hop culture, the Black American experience as a way into bigger ideas. Some people are turned off by it, some people are thrown off by it, but I think that I know that he's an extremely intelligent dude, man, gentleman, and it's fun. You know, Boondocks is fun. I mean, I don't really know what else to say about it outside of, you know, having the opportunity to work with someone who pushes the button and sort of uses a lot of the things that I work with, which hip-hop, the language, the music, and where it comes from, and sort of where the ideas and inspiration for a lot of the culture that would inspire hip-hop and or touch, you know, mainstream culture or African American culture. He works with all of these things in a way that is unique and interesting. So it was cool having the opportunity to work with him on that.
Looking at Fresh Dress, there's some incredible people you got to interview and some big time people. What was it like interviewing them about just the broad subject of culture and the way they just act and look? I mean, that seems like such fun interviews. It seems like such interesting interviews. What was that experience like for you?
Well, for me, you know, I've been a journalist for a lot of years, so I've interviewed lots of artists over the years. And what I found with this film, you know, talking about something that they don't always get the opportunity to talk about and something that's really close to their hearts is what kind of opens up this film in really unique and interesting ways. I mean, Kanye West, for instance, you know, he's Kanye, so, you know, we've been trying to get him for a really long time. And it's like, all right, can you go to Mexico tomorrow? We figured it out. And, you know, depending on which Kanye you get, you know, you're going to get Kanye in lots of different ways. But when you engage him on a level of like, let's talk about something that's really important to you, that's a part of your life, that goes beyond music, that was a part of your upbringing and a part of your worldview, you know, using the lens of hip-hop fashion or sort of the origins of the sensibility, you know, where ideas of like sagging pants or other things that are sort of phenomenon within the culture, he's super excited about that, you know, and his insights, you know, were, I think people appreciate, you know, this sort of different look at where Kanye's coming from. So, I mean, I interviewed Pharrell Williams, I interviewed Big Daddy Kane. It's a really broad range of people. Ricardo Tisci, who's, you know, the famous designer, you know. So it's a good mix of really well-known people, really well-known mainstream people, and then lots of people who are a part of the culture that everyone might not know, but have made really important contributions to the sensibility. I keep getting asked by people, you know, what does fresh mean? You know, on a very simple level, you know, in the inner city, you know, clothing, being able to wear clothing that is fresh out of the box is almost like a status symbol, especially if it's stuff that's pricey. You know, it says you have money. And you talk to lots of other people and they'll tell you, well, I don't think about clothing on that level. Clothing is just something that I wear. It's function.
Hmm.
But that's the whole message inside of the film. It's not only just about the innovations or how, flamboyant and how, these people can really dress. I mean, that's part of it. But really it's about the social conditions that created this sort of mentality, in this really creative environment where people are using fashion as a way to identify themselves. There's also this culture of a group of people being bred to be consumers.
Mm.
And that's what's interesting that comes out of the film. There was a point where, this community went from being consumers to having their own brands. Rockaware, Sean, John, Carl Kanai, all of these folks, coming together and say, you know what, we've been spending money on all these other brands and supporting these other folks. Let's get it together and let's build our own thing.
You brought up Ricardo, and I think it's a good, and what you were just saying, the impact of the culture on the fashion has been just as big as, in the beginning, like you said, where people are just wearing clothes. I'm curious, with those brands, Kangol and the different styles, now that the culture has taken those and put them on the map and even expanded them, the financial change of that, like, that's changed the way people brand completely. Is that something you wanted to showcase as well? Like, this wasn't just some people who look good. This was something that completely changed the way people sell clothes.
Right. Well, what's interesting about that is a lot of those brands, and you can't really be mad at a brand that has a very specific audience,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're mountain boot brand X, typically your audience are people who are mountain climbers or who hike, et cetera, et cetera. It's not necessarily inner city folk, right? But then inner city folk using fashion as a way to make a statement about their individuality pull from so many different sources to be original. And so all of a sudden, this boot that was intended for, hikers, in Vermont is now all the rage in Harlem. And so, of course, now there's all kinds of new money being discovered by these brands, right? So there's a bit of a, sometimes there's like well, we don't make clothes for these people, it's not necessarily our audience. We don't necessarily want that audience, so there's that. But I think over time that's changed. I think even these brands that were initially sort of resistant or hesitant to sort of embrace urban culture have now either found ways to work with it to make it work for them, or are more open-minded to embracing that audience. And so that's the other thing, about fashion. To me, it's like people, what's your fascination with fashion? And for me, it's not about like the brands. It's about the psychology behind the folks who are innovative, who say, I wear this and I'm going to make it cool. It's not the brand making them cool per se. It's the power of the individual to make the brand cool, and how that translates on a larger scale. Because then by someone applying their power of cool, like, I'm going to take that hiking boot, I'm going to wear it. No, it's not even supposed to be cool, but I'm going to make it cool. So it's this transfer of power that sort of flies into this boot. At the same time, though, there are other issues. Some folks are spending money they don't have on things that they can't really afford, and this boot represents a certain level of status, and it's not just people in the inner city; it's Americans in general. We overspend to keep up with what everyone else is doing, or the perception of what everyone else is doing. So that's why this whole conversation of fashion, particularly coming from the inner city, which is where I'm from, was something that I felt was a necessary conversation to have.
Can I touch upon something you said a little bit just a second ago about how brands were reacting to the fact that these aren't the people we're selling, that we normally would sell to? How do we cater to that, or how do we not cater to that? Because not every brand has necessarily embraced their brand being taken over by a culture. Mm-hmm. What about that type of reaction? I mean, that seems to be whole nother story. It can break barriers, but it can also maybe even create barriers. It seems like some brands' reaction to this it's almost, I don't want to say racist, but it's it's mean, how they don't want it to become part of it. How much did that?
Well, it's you know, and to a certain extent, it is racist. There's two ways to look at it. It's like, on one hand, if you're a brand and you have a very particular audience, that's who you cater to. Like, should you feel guilty if you don't want to necessarily cater to an audience that's not necessarily who you started out catering to? I don't necessarily think so. At the same time, though, there is a level of, well, maybe you should acknowledge it somehow. Maybe there's a way to give back. I know this is capitalist America, so it would be nice if people did. I don't necessarily believe that they have an obligation, and the real power is in, you know, your spending. Like, if you don't feel like these brands are giving back to you, then don't spend. You know, what are you expecting from a brand beyond something that you enjoy wearing? What is a brand really supposed to do for you? But that's the thing, in the inner city, there's so much invested in what Polo, for instance. You know, you're wearing a Polo shirt. There's a gang from New York that's in my film called the Lowlifes. Low is short for Polo. And their whole thing was, you know, these were inner city kids from Brooklyn who would go to, you know, the mall and go to the Polo section, 40 of them, and run in and take everything they could and run out. And then you would see them on the streets, 80 kids wearing the exact same outfit. Well, those guys were in Brooklyn the same time as Jay-Z. So their whole thing is, we were wearing these clothes, people saw the impact of what we were doing, right? And it wound up influencing the people like Jay-Z who would go on to influence the world. So Polo didn't pay the lowlifes money for 80 kids to wear the exact same outfit. But imagine if brands consciously said, okay, we're going to the Mall of America, we're gonna outfit 80 kids with the exact same Polo outfit. What would that do?
Wow, that's a fascinating thought. Like, brands taking over the idea, that seems like it'd be scary if they did plant that. I think it's nice that it's the culture that impacts the fashion. Maybe fashion not impacting culture would be a little scary. I mean, it seems like that would be they're just going for the capitalist dollar.
Well, it's a two-way street, because the inner city says Polo represents this lifestyle, this aspirational lifestyle that separates me from my environment. You know, the other folks in my neighborhood who are just like me, they see me wearing this every day, brand new out of the box. What does that say? I have money. I'm separate from you. And, you know, I don't think that's necessarily a unique phenomenon in the inner city. I think ultimately it's an American phenomenon, you know, trying to keep up with what everyone else is wearing, or trying to keep up with the idea of having money. But what was interesting about hip-hop early on was there were no brands that specifically catered to, you know, anyone in the community. So it really was about mixing and matching. In different regions, you know, the 5 boroughs of New York, they all had distinctive looks. I could see someone on the subway and say, oh, he's from Brooklyn, based on what he was wearing. So there were regional ideas that were popular. So there's all of that language. You know, fashion ultimately, especially in hip-hop, is language. It's another level of communication. A guy can come in here right now wearing a pair of sneakers that I know for a fact are discontinued and they're from like 1984. He doesn't have to say anything, but I can see him see those shoes, and I'll say to that person, I know what you're doing right now. You're sending a message. You're sending a message that says, I have something you don't have. And that makes me an individual. And I think when you look at the overall sort of situation that people of color have been in America, this idea of, I own who I am, I'm an individual, I stand out, you recognize me. This sense of like wanting to be recognized is a big part of this language of fashion. And that was what I wanted to, you know, in addition to all the fun and like, hey, these guys are cool and they dress nice in the videos and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's there. But the bigger idea of, you know, the Sunday best, do you know what that means?
Yeah. Oh, no.
You tell me what it means.
It means, you know, you're dressing for church. You're dressing for, to be seen by the public. You're going to dress the best clothes you've got.
Right. Well, what that comes from the slavery era in America, where in certain states it was mandated that slave owners had to outfit their slaves with one nice outfit so they could go to church and worship a God that was completely foreign to them and their African belief systems. So when you think about the term Sunday best, not just black people, everyone uses the term Sunday best, right? Well, that's where it comes from. So when you think about the language of fashion and how you wear can affect how you're perceived, especially for people of color, especially inside of their own community, it's like, okay, we're all in this situation, but I want to be, I want to feel like I'm on another level. And the fact that fashion can do that says a lot about the power of what it is that people choose to wear.
That's fascinating. Wow. Do you mind if I ask kind of a final question? I'm a big Shark Tank fan, so I look at what FUBU did for one man and how that impacted. And you brought up Rockaware with Jay-Z. The money that's now involved in the new brands and the amount of brands that come about, where do you see fashion going from here?
Well, I think it's kind of returned to this. Well, for one, kids in the inner city know who Riccardo Tisci is. So that's what's interesting. The mainstream fashion world, now these big name designers are like Kanye. Kanye's friends with these guys. We should know who he is. So there's this greater consciousness that is connected to high fashion, right? At the same time, in the 90s and early 2000s, all of these rappers had brands. They had clothing lines. And it became like Rockaware was the Jay-Z uniform. Blah Blah was the so-and-so. And Master P had a clothing line.
Sean John.
Eminem had a clothing line. It was like the rapper uniform. But even in a conversation I had with Jay-Z, I was like, you have this brand, Rockaware, but you don't wear it, right? You're wearing the stuff that everyone struggles to pronounce in America, right? So the kid in the inner city wants to wear what you're wearing, and you're not wearing your own stuff. You're wearing the other stuff. So it's this sort of greater consciousness in terms of understanding the value of high fashion, right? And sort of really reaching for it. But what's troubling is you're dealing with people who can't afford a $900 t-shirt, right? But that $900 t-shirt means something. Somehow that $900 t-shirt, if I can have that and I have nothing, it gives me this feeling of euphoria. What is that saying about what's going on? Now, going back to the other half of the question, you still have these brands that pop up. I think the lifespan isn't as long because with the internet and everything else, everyone has a very short attention span. I mean, Levi's, I'll wear it till I die. I don't know that these new brands popping up will have that same brand loyalty that a Levi's or some of these other brands have had. And then you have like this emergence of stores like H&M who make this kind of fashion that feels a little bit more aspirational and is a lot more affordable. So you have these new chains coming in that are offering, everyday people can have a little bit more style than everyday people typically have had over the years at an affordable price. JCPenney will do collaborations with different people, not just Martha Stewart, but, like hip designers. So the market has kind of been broken up. It's a little bit more broad and more everyday people have entry level access to semi decent, not just Wranglers fashion.
Wow. Well, I can't wait for audiences to see the film and to not only look at it as just fashion, but the impact of fashion. So, Sacha, thank you for coming to Dallas. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.